Today we continue with Deuteronomy chapters 21 through 24. I will read key passages and I encourage you to read the full chapters on your own. The full reading reference is provided for you below. As Israel prepares to enter the promised land, Moses teaches that no part of life is outside of God's concern. Justice, family, marriage, worship, work, and care for others all matter to the Lord. Deuteronomy 21, 1 to 9, Moses teaches that innocent bloodshed must never be ignored. Even when a murderer could not be identified, the community was responsible to seek justice before God. 21, 10 to 14, an Israelite soldier who wished to marry a captive woman was required to treat her with dignity rather than as property. 21, 15 to 17 protects the inheritance rights of the firstborn son. Deuteronomy 21, 18 to 21, Moses addresses persistent rebellion within the covenant community, showing the seriousness of rejecting God's authority. Finally, in Deuteronomy 21, 22 to 23, teaches that anyone hung on a tree was under God's curse, a passage later applied to Christ. 22, 1 to 4. God's people are commanded to help their neighbor rather than ignore their needs. In Deuteronomy 22, 6 to 8, Moses teaches respect for life and responsibility toward others. 22, 9 to 11, Israel is warned against mixing unlike things, reinforcing their calling to be distinct and set apart for God. 22, 13 to 21, false accusations against a wife are condemned, and truth is protected. In Deuteronomy 22, 22 through 30, marriage is treated as sacred, adultery is condemned, and victims of sexual violence are protected by the law. 23, 1 to 8. Moses gives regulations concerning participation within the covenant community. 23, 9 to 14. The camp was to remain holy because God's presence was among his people. Deuteronomy 23, 15 to 16. Escaped slaves seeking refuge were not to be returned to oppression. 23, 17 to 18. Moses strongly condemns cult prostitution and the pagan worship practices of Canaan. The remainder of the chapter emphasizes honesty, integrity, and faithfulness in daily life. Deuteronomy 24, 1 to 5, Moses addresses divorce, which was permitted because of human sinfulness, but was never God's ideal. Deuteronomy 24, 6 to 13, God protects individuals from exploitation and commands fairness toward the poor. 24, 14 to 22, Moses repeatedly calls Israel to show compassion toward laborers, foreigners, widows, and orphans, remembering that they themselves were once slaves in Egypt. Now, what do these chapters teach and show us? God cares about every area of our life. Justice and mercy work together. They just must. Human life has value because it comes from God. Marriage is sacred. God's people are called to holiness. Truth matters. God defends the vulnerable. Compassion should characterize God's people. Now, let's connect all of this across Scripture. Loving and helping neighbors reflects Leviticus 19 and 18, and Jesus' teaching in Matthew 22 and 39. Deuteronomy 21 and 23 is applied to Christ in Galatians 3 and 13. The call to remain separate from corruption echoes 2 Corinthians 6 and 14. Jesus refers to Deuteronomy 24 when discussing God's design for marriage in Matthew 19, 3 to 9. God's concern for widows, orphans, and the poor continues throughout Scripture and is reflected in James 1 and 27. Now, I'm encouraging you to read chapters 21 to 24 in full. Watch how God's justice and compassion work together. Watch how holiness touches every life. The story continues tomorrow.